Thank you guys for a wonderful weekend. It has been really, really good to be with you guys and to fellowship with you. And the meal was outstanding. You guys have had more people stay for a fellowship meal than I preached at some churches. I mean, it was really, really a good crowd, and it was really good food. So a lot of times when we talk about relationships and we talk about family, one of the things that we really need to spend time on is sometimes when we talk about the dynamic of the couple or the individuals, but one of the principles that I find that we skip sometimes, we don't get to spend a lot of time on, it's almost like we assume it, is the idea of our intrapersonal relationships. Interpersonal relationships is when people run into each other. Systemic relationships are when there's a lot of you and only one of me. And then intrapersonal is how I manage the me that's me. And I ran into some writings years ago, a guy named Daniel Goleman, and he talks about emotional intelligence. And when you start talking about emotional intelligence, number one, if you're a parent, emotional intelligence is the predictor for success in your kids. It's not your GPA, it's not your ACT, it's not your SAT, but it's how emotionally intelligent you are. There are a lot of people in Huntsville, Alabama who have 160 IQ who are working for people who have 100 IQ because the C students have social skills and the A+ students, sometimes not so much. And so when you start looking at what makes people successful or allows people to be leaders, it boils down sometimes to emotional intelligence. I like normally to take a section of scripture and develop it. We call that expository preaching. Basically, when I read the Bible, I look for facts: who, what, when, where, who wrote it, who rewrote it to, what was going on when they wrote it, how big, how high, how much, how many, the facts. The facts lead to concepts: trust, mercy, faith, endurance, perseverance. Facts plus concepts, you can create application. But there's sometimes when there are passages in the Bible and they're not really part of the main text. They're sort of said in passing, but they contain a lot of wisdom. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul is writing to his audience, and in the context, he's talking about sexual purity. He's talking about maintaining the idea of not being immoral. He'll use the word holy and sanctified. My understanding is that justification is where God calls us not guilty and makes us righteous, and sanctification is where we try to change our lifestyle to match that calling. The process of sanctification is me learning to behave differently, me learning to think differently, me learning to act differently. So this is what Paul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 3. For this is the will of God. God's intention for you as an individual. This is the will of God, your sanctification, that you should abstain from sexual immorality. He said there's parameters with which you should express your sexuality, and outside those parameters, that's known as immorality. That's known as something you can't do, something you shouldn't do, something that hurts you, something that hurts the other person, or something that hurts both of you. So you shouldn't do this. Each of you should learn how to possess his own vessel with sanctification and honor. So the idea here is a chariot racing term. You're possessing your own vessel. So you're in this metal buggy. It's got two wheels. By the way, those wheels are as wide as a railroad track. That's why our railroad tracks are as wide as they are. They're based on a Roman chariot. So you've got this buggy. You got a guy driving. He's pulling horses, or the horses are pulling him, and you're racing around a circle. You're racing around a hippodrome. Well, if you get out of your lane and that chariot is another chariot, what do you have? A mess, okay? And you're going to kill the horses, you're going to kill the riders, you're going to tear the chairs. So Paul says God's will for you is sexual purity. You possess your vessel. You learn to control the vehicle. That means there's things that are happening in the vehicle that can control you, or you can control the vehicle. This is the original stay in your lane, bro verse, okay? This is the verse that says, I want you to learn to control the vessel, your human vessel, your chariot, with sanctification and honor, not like the Gentiles do in passion of lust, And these people don't know God. Now, in the true context here, he's just talking about lust. He says, you're controlling this vessel, and just because you have this desire, just because you have this appetite, just because you have this hunger, you shouldn't let that vessel drift out of its lane. You control it with honor. You control it with sanctification. And the contrast to that is not like the people who aren't Christians, not like the people who let their passion of lust control them. Now, I'm going to take some liberties with that term. If my passions, my lust, my hungers, my appetites don't control my vessel, then neither do my emotions. And learning about emotional intelligence to balance our relationships is super, super important. And you know, a lot of times I'll consume material and kind of modify it, you know, into Lonnie Jones speak or whatever. I just like to quote Goldman. Look at this chart. Emotional insight, first of all. Do you know your own emotions? This is the degree that you have self-awareness and recognizing a feeling as it happens. It's psychological insight and self-awareness. If you can't tell the difference between being angry and sad, you see people who are out of control, especially males. When an adult male acts particularly aggressive, that's because he feels threatened, he feels insecure. So when you see somebody who's acting like they're this real big, bad, tough guy, he's not really tough, he's insecure. Well, if he knew he was insecure, he'd act differently. But since he doesn't know he's insecure, he acts like a bully. You know, a dog that will bite you will bite you. A dog that will bark at you will bark at you. Rarely do barking dogs bite. Biting dogs don't bark. You know, hey, I think that dog bites because he just bit you. That's how you know. Well, these people who don't understand their own emotions have trouble. Girls with eating disorders confuse being sad or depressed or unhappy or out of control or powerless with hungry. You start thinking about people who are addicted to anything, the behavior gets linked to boredom, stress, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. Well, if I recognize, hey, I'm having emotions, and again, we've said this twice already, emotional control is not having the emotion. Emotional control is being aware of the emotion and learning how to respond to it. Our emotions are information, not instruction. And people who get in trouble in relationships, once they move into the emotional part of their brain, they think their brain is telling them how to act. Your emotions don't tell you to do something, they just tell you something. You know, if I'm driving home and I stop at a Conoco station and I get out and the sign on the thing says clean restrooms, and I get a mop and a bucket and some rubber gloves and try to borrow a water hose and tell my wife, I spent an hour at this little store because I got out and it said clean the restroom. She'll say, no, the sign means the restrooms are clean. It doesn't mean you clean the restrooms. Well, a lot of times we have emotions and we think they tell us to do something. Well, being emotionally intelligent is, hey, I recognize that I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm angry, I'm depressed, I'm anxious. Now, my job as a mature person in a relationship with God and in a relationship with other people is not, I don't have that emotion, but how do I manage experiencing that emotion? And that leads to number 2, which is self-regulation. Self-regulation boils down to managing my emotions. It doesn't mean I don't have them. It means how do I manage them? Notice this, handling feelings so they are the appropriate is an ability that builds on self-awareness. This includes self-soothing, shaking off rampant anxiety, gloom, irritability, and the consequences of failure. People who can't do this skill are constantly battling feelings of distress. When I experience failure, when I experience gloom, when I experience irritation, when I experience anxiety, and I learn how to manage, not I don't have that, but just learning that having it, I need to respond to that. You know, if you ever had a panic attack or an anxiety episode, you know what that feels like? Your heart beats out of your chest. Your lungs get tight. You feel like you can't breathe. You have this goofy feeling in your stomach. You have a narrowing of focus. You get auditory exclusion. Your hands either get really sweaty or really cold. When that happens to you, is your body working properly? Yes, your body's working just like it was designed to work. Because when my mind says, hey, there's danger, there's stress, there's a threat, we call it the fight or flight response. And it doesn't really matter. You know, if a bear comes through that back window, I've got to make a decision. Am I going to fight the bear or run from the bear? Doesn't really matter what I decide. When I decide to do it, my body makes me alert, motivated, and strong. In order to be able to run from the bear or fight the bear, I've got to have adrenaline. I've got to have cortisol. I've got to have testosterone. I've got to change my breathing. I get all these hormones that get dumped into my stomach, which is the quickest path to my bloodstream. And so I've got all this that's why your stomach feels goofy. You get this emotional cue that there's a threat. Now all these hormones are in my stomach. My stomach doesn't like those. If you get a lot of adrenaline in your stomach and you don't get to burn it off, you'll throw up. Just happens. Well, once I have all these hormones in my stomach, in order to get all those hormones to my bloodstream, my heart beats over time. And because my heart starts beating over time, my lungs have to keep up. And then all of a sudden, all that work in my core takes away the peripheral stuff, and my fingers tingle or get cold or whatever. When that happens, you should rejoice that your body works really, really fine. People who don't respond to threat or consequences, those are sociopaths. They just go. But when your body responds that way, your body's not broken. Your body's telling you, hey, there's work to do. You either got to run from the bear or fight the bear. It doesn't really matter what decision you make. Your body makes you alert, motivated, and strong. Now, the problem is when I feel like something causes stress in me, it's not, oh, I shouldn't feel this anxiety. I ask myself, is this really dangerous? Is it really terrible to try out for the team? Is it really terrible to meet with the principal? Is it really dangerous to stand up and read a speech? If you're a 15-year-old boy, is your life at threat to talk to a girl? You know, and all of a sudden we have this anxiety. Well, once you recognize that, hey, I have these feelings and I must regulate how I respond to those feelings, not eliminate those feelings. Now I have emotional insight and I have self-regulation. Well, once I understand that these feelings sometimes aren't pleasant, but I've still got to do work, it leads to number 3, which is motivating yourself. Marshaling your emotions in the service of a goal is essential for paying attention, for self-motivation, for mastery and creativity. Emotional self-control, delayed gratification, and stifling impulses underlie everything that you're going to accomplish of every sort. The difference between people who are successful and people who aren't successful is they can't do emotional control. They don't do delayed gratification. They don't postpone rewards. You know, it's anything that gives you immediate results, the results don't last long. Anything that takes a long time to get lasts a long time. And especially our younger generation, they don't understand adversity. I believe in a principle I call intentional adversity. I believe that I do things in my life that you will not do. So I can do things in my life that you cannot do. And you've got to decide that. You got to choose your hard. It's hard to get up and go to work every day for a job. It's hard to live under a bridge. Choose your hard. It's hard to do the work that it takes to fix a marriage. It's hard to be divorced. Choose your hard. And so when you understand that, hey, I've got these emotions, now I've got to motivate myself to respond to these emotions, and I have to do delayed gratification. I can't have what I want when I want it. I've got to work for it, and I can't do impulse control. I can't quit because it's hard. I can't quit because I didn't think it would be this hard. I can't quit because I'm mad. I can't quit because I'm frustrated. You've got to have the motivation to do these things. And then once I make peace with me, once I recognize, hey, I'm having anxiety, I'm having depression, I'm having fear, I'm having anger, I'm irritable, what am I going to do with that? How am I going to respond to it? Well, I'm not going to let my emotions control the vessel. I'm going to control my vessel with the emotions in it. You look at the 2 great examples of emotional thinking. Elijah on Mount Carmel has God answer a prayer for him by burning an altar, evaporating an altar, turning it to cosmic dust. in response to Elijah's prayer. And in 3 days, he gets a nasty text from Jezebel that says, I've asked the gods to help me kill you. And Elijah runs out of town, hides in the wilderness, and asks God to let him die. He's in his emotional brain. He's letting the words of Jezebel have more power than God's words. He's letting what Jezebel says she's going to do be more powerful than what he's seen God do. And he looks at God and says, I'm the only guy who's on your side. I'm the only guy who's faithful. They killed everybody. And in reality, there's 7,000 people that haven't worshiped Baal. Not only do they not kill Elijah, Elijah doesn't even die. And his view of the world is an emotional view, not an intellectual view. Second great example of that is Esau. Esau comes in from hunting. He's tired, he's weary, he's exhausted. His little brother's cooking red soup. He says, hey, let me have some red soup. His little brother says, sell me your birthright. Esau goes from I'm hungry to if I don't eat this red soup, I'm going to die. That's a pretty big leap, isn't it? We go from I'm a little sad to I'm depressed. You disappointed me, our marriage won't work. This person's angry. Nobody loves me. Everybody hates me. I think I'll go out and eat worms. And all of a sudden we do these extreme thinking. That's emotion-based thinking. We don't have, Elijah and Esau both did not do delayed gratification, and they did not do impulse control. In fact, you look at poor Jacob's brother Esau. Who's his grandfather? Well, that'd be a guy named Abraham. Abraham had an army of 300 men who were born and trained in his household in the art of warfare. If you have a private army, you know what you have? Groceries. Because armies don't say where you can't feed them. And if Esau will take his eyes off the red soup and look around, he'll see flocks and herds and goats and servants and pomegranates and turtle doves and all kinds of things. But he forgets about his father's inheritance and thinks the only thing that'll make me happy is that. That's how people have affairs. If I can't be friends with that person on Facebook, if I can't find my old high school sweetheart, I can't get over this disappointment that my husband or my wife did, delayed gratification and impulse control goes out the window. And you make terrible, terrible mistakes when you think with your emotional mind. Now, once you get a handle on that, once you can handle, hey, I've got these emotions, look what happens. Verse number 4, you recognize emotions in others. So I know what it is to be mad. I know what it is to be angry. I know what it is to be sad. I know what it is to be anxious. I walk into a room and I start looking, oh, that person feels this. This person's experiencing that. I said this, they had this reaction. Once I recognize the emotions in others, I have empathy. Empathy is another ability that builds on emotional awareness and emotional self-awareness. It's the fundamental people skill. People who are empathetic are more attuned to the social cues of others, and they can figure out what other people need or want. Empathy is whether or not you're self-absorbed or other-aware. The ultimate skill in Christianity. And by the way, if you hadn't figured it out yet, emotional intelligence, that fancy stuff on the board in 5 paragraphs, treat others like you'd like to be treated. That's what Jesus said. He said, you understand how you want to be treated, and you have that attunement, and you put yourself in their position, and you treat them like you'd like to be treated. The difference in true mental illness, organic condition of the brain, and maladaptive behavior, people are immature, unsophisticated, or just not doing well. The difference in those two things is mentally ill people can't do this, and maladaptive people can but don't. That's the difference. I can't dunk a basketball. Okay? There's some dudes in here that are tall enough to do it, they just won't. They quit jumping, they quit working out, they quit running, they quit doing squats, all that kind of stuff. Well, I can do all the squats and jumping and running I want to. It ain't going to happen. Mr. Gravity loves me and has a handle on me. I can't dunk a basketball. There are people who are tall enough to do it but don't. That's the difference between true illness, true liability, and disability versus maladaptive behavior. People who can't do emotional intelligence are mentally ill. People who don't do it, don't exercise it, are unsophisticated or immature, or what I like to call maladaptive. And then once you understand your emotions, And once you can recognize the emotions in others, it leads to the thing we've been talking about all weekend, handling relationships. This is the skill in managing, it should be responding to the emotions of others. This is the tipping point between social competence and incompetence. It's the specific skills involved, and it's the abilities that undergird popularity, leadership, and interpersonal effectiveness. If you don't understand your own emotions, you can't have a good conversation with your spouse. If you don't understand your spouse's emotions, you can't have a good conversation with your spouse. If you don't get attuned to your teenager's emotional state, you can't do any corrective or any instructive stuff with them. And teenagers, if you don't get in contact with how your parents feel about something and it's only from yours, it creates all kinds of difficulties in relationships. So Paul says you should control your vessel, not let your vessel be controlled by passions. And I'm modifying that to say you don't let your vessel be controlled by emotions. And when we understand emotional intelligence, I start trying to figure out, okay, first of all, do I understand the me that's me? And then do I understand the you that's you? And if you can't manage that with other people, if you can't see from another person's perspective, you're either mentally ill or you're not very well adapted. I oversimplify things sometimes. I don't think I'm a sophisticated person. But, somebody does something bad and you put him on trial. I think you just simply ask the question, the thing that you did, would you want us to do it to you? And if they say no, then they knew what they did was bad. They knew what they did was wrong. Now, there may be all kind of complicating factors, delusions, or all kind of things to make them behave that way. But it really boils down to if you're aware enough to know, I wouldn't want to be shot. I wouldn't want to be hit. I wouldn't want to be run over. I wouldn't want you to steal my stuff. If you know enough that you don't want it to happen to you, you shouldn't do it to somebody else. Gentlemen, would you let any other male on the planet talk to your wife the way you talk to her when you're angry? Tone or that manner, use those words, what gives you permission? Young people, would you want a person who your dad or your mom was coaching or babysitting or teaching lessons to, would you want them to talk to your folks the way you talk to them? Would you want them to treat your parents with the disrespect that you... No. Well, if you wouldn't want somebody to do it to your parents, what gives you permission to do it? And it basically boils down to being aware of my emotions, being aware of the emotions in other people, and responding to that with what we call emotional intelligence. And so that's not intrapersonal skills, but now it's interpersonal skills, because managing the me that's me helps me to deal with the you that's you. And learning that I have to regulate my emotions. Self-regulation is delayed gratification and impulse control. Now, that's a lot of words to take us back to Ephesians 4. In Ephesians 4, he talks about, I want you to be wise and I want you to redeem the time. One of the things that happens in our lives is we have difficulties in relationships because of stress. Stress comes from conflict, pressure, and frustration. Conflict is when what I want and what you want don't agree. Pressure is when you tell me I've got to do it, I got to do it now, I got to do more. And then frustration is I try to do it and it don't work. It's like when you look up how to fix your iPhone and it tells you to find it and it doesn't even have the icon on your phone. Okay, I think it's therapeutic to throw an iPhone. I just believe that. I think it's good for you. I think everybody should have an old iPhone that they can just throw. But don't do it with your new iPhone. But when you start looking at those kind of things, you say there's conflict, pressure, and frustration. Well, when you start thinking about conflict, pressure, and frustration, it really boils down to understanding that in life we only control a couple of things. I believe that we control our time, not how much time we have, but what we do with the time we have. I believe we control our money, not necessarily how much money we have, but what we do with the money we have, and our energy, what we do with our available time. And so in dealing with conflict, pressure, and frustration, and emotional insight into families, it brings us to this little chart that I found several years ago called the Eisenhower box. This is Eisenhower's box. That's why it's called Eisenhower box. I saw it set up like this in a Stephen Covey book. Now, if you notice this little box, the top is important. The bottom is not important. On your left is going to be urgent, and then it's not urgent. So that gives you this quadrant here, things are important and urgent. This quadrant here, things are important and not urgent. This quadrant here, things are urgent but not important. And then this quadrant, things are not urgent, not important. So when I get up every week, when I say, hey, what are we going to do with our money? What are we going to do with our time? What are we going to do with our energy? When Jackie and I make plans about how we spend our lives, this is kind of our decision-making metric. And I thought it might be good to share that with you to help in your relationships with families. Well, now, when Eisenhower originally did the box, Eisenhower said, okay, this is what you do with this. You do, you decide, you delegate, and you delete. And that's clever and funny and all starts with D's. It didn't really help me out. It didn't, I thought, okay, I get it. I can kind of, and I didn't find that very practical. I had been a police chaplain with a SWAT team for about 7 years. And I'm not a sworn officer. I don't have a gun. I don't kick doors in. I typically don't put my hands on people. There's some exceptions to that. But, I'm just there because they want me there. We call it the ministry of presence. And about 7 years into that, I realized, you know what? You're a glorified mascot. You wear the Ninja Turtle vest and the skateboard helmet, and you go, yay, SWAT, and I'm really not doing much. So I decided I would go to a tactical medic school. I found a group called Suarez International. They offer this thing. And so I went and took a 4-day seminar in tactical medicine. Now, what I thought I was going to do in tactical medic school was learn how to start an IV, do a hemothorax, a pneumothorax, do field tracheotomies with a pencil. Cool stuff. You know what they teach you in tactical medicine? Bleeding and breathing. If he's bleeding, stop it. If he's not breathing, start it. That's it. $1,000 for 4 days to learn how to tie tourniquets, compressions, and shoot each other with paintballs, which I'm good at. I told Doc Meade, I said, I kind of feel like that's a lot of money to spend 4 days to learn how to do tourniquets and chest compressions. He said, well, in an urban environment, he said, you're not in the jungle, you're not out here in the woods. He said, you've got about an hour to stabilize somebody and get them to the hospital. You've got cars with lights and sirens. You've got helicopters. You can get somebody to the hospital. He said, what you're worried about, bleeding and breathing, have immediate consequences. And when he said that, my brain went, oh, the Eisenhower box. If you want to know what's urgent and important with your time, your money, and your energy, ask what this week has immediate consequences. Hey, if you don't put gas in your car ain't going nowhere. Don't spend your money on tacos, not gas. I can't afford this, I can't afford that, but I'm smoking 2 packs a day and I own an iPhone. Whoops, spent that money wrong. And all of a sudden, I start looking at my time, my money, and my energy, and there's some things that if I don't do today, right now, the wheels are going to come off. So everything that is urgent and important has immediate consequences. Well, if that has immediate consequences, that means these things that are important but not urgent, they have delayed consequences. Delayed consequences are you're going to pay the piper. You're just not going to pay it today. There's going to be a test, but the test's not today. This is love mapping with your spouse. This is spending time with your kids. This is exercise. This is eating right. This is making investments. This is Bible study and prayer. Hey, young people, you young men that are under the age of 25, you're not going to wake up one day and them go, hey, would you like to be an elder? And you go to elder school. You're making decisions right now, who you date, who you marry, and what you do, that'll decide whether you'll ever be an elder in the church. And some of the decisions you're making right now have delayed consequences. There's lots of things, I don't want to get too martial, but people call me all the time. Hey, Lonnie, you work with the cops. I'm going to get a gun. What should I learn to do with the gun? Learn to load it and unload it. What? It's really not hard to shoot a gun. There's the business end, you point it. If it's within close combat range, you keep both eyes open, you pull the trigger. It makes noise. It works. But if you pull the trigger and it goes click, you've got an expensive hammer. And if you don't know how to deal, they talk about a type 1 or a type 2 malfunction. Well, when a gun says click, it means feed me or fix me. And if you don't know how to tap, rang, bang, it's no good to you. I don't care how you can shoot. Can you fix a problem? And if you don't do just the simple drill of loading and unloading that gun's not going to do you any good under a stressful situation. Those kind of skills have delayed consequences. And delayed consequences are the things that it's important, but nobody's testing you on it. Then you get to this situation here, and it's things that feel urgent, but they're not important. That circle right there has perceived consequences. Everybody's telling you, you got to do this to be successful. You got to have this to be right. You got to make this. It doesn't really matter. It's perceived consequence. Your kids don't have to play 7 sports. You can skip Little League baseball to go to the beach with your grandparents. The Major League Scouts probably won't be there till they're, in the 8th grade? You don't have to go to the movie the night it opens. It'll be at the theater for 6 weeks. It'll be on cable in 6 months. And if you go the night it opens, people who wear costumes will be there. You don't want to be in that crowd. You don't have to have an iPhone 37, and you ain't got to drive to Pasadena to watch a championship. You can watch it on cable. But we think it's urgent, and we sell our souls for that. Now, if you get over here in this category here, things that are not urgent, not important, they don't matter. They have no consequences. In 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, it ain't going to matter. I don't offend anybody. That's where I put cutting grass. If I don't run that mower through it in November, it'll frost and kill the whole thing. Start over. I'm going home this afternoon, Lord willing. My grass does need to be cut, but my 3-year-old grandson's going to be there. And if he wants to go play in the creek or I'm going to cut grass, guess what we're going to do? We're going to play in the creek. If my wife says, hey, you want to cut grass or go for a walk with those little dogs she has, I'll go for a walk. If I can cut grass or go fish, I'm taking my dad fishing. I'm just not going to do things that don't have any consequences. I'm not going to do that. Now, probably in this room with like-minded people who've been to a marriage seminar, we would, with the exception of the grass cutting thing, we would agree 95% on this category and this category. Where your family gets out of balance and where people lose their souls is when this category and this category trade places. When I take things that are urgent but not important and I do them first and ignore things that are important but not urgent. Now, if you go back to the other chart, delayed gratification and impulse control. The people with delayed gratification issues and impulse control live in this circuit. This is where all your people with personality disorders live. This is where all your people with addictions live. This is all your people in divorces live. Because what happens is they've taken things that feel like it has to happen right now, and it's just not that important, and they've let their emotional control get out of control. And we don't lose our souls and we don't lose our balance because we don't understand this and this. It's when this becomes less important than this and we live our lives out of control, we lose our balance, and I think we lose our souls because of that. So when you start thinking about what am I going to do with my family, how am I going to manage my time, my money, my energy, I'm not going to let my emotions manage me, because if I let my emotions manage me, this is where I make the decisions. But when I have emotional intelligence and when I control my own vessel with sanctification and in honor, then I take care of immediate consequences, delayed consequences. Sometimes I deal with perceived consequences, and I don't fool with anything that has no consequences. And that's not necessarily a gospel lesson, but I think it's a very practical lesson to help us live good gospel lives. Paul tells Timothy, you have not been given a spirit of fear. You're not controlled by an emotion. You've been given the power of love, sound mind, and self-control. Paul says if you want to live and live as an individual optimally, and being an optimal individual helps you interact with other individuals, then you're not controlled by fear, but you have love, power, and a sound mind. Sometimes that word sound mind is translated as self-control, self-regulation, emotional regulation, possessing your own vessel. So So when you start thinking about, hey, why am I having trouble with people at work? Why am I having trouble with people at home? Why am I having trouble? It may be that I'm not very emotionally aware, and instead of controlling my response to my emotions, I'm letting my emotions control me, and I'm making bad priority decisions based on emotional intelligence or spiritual immaturity. And I think if you were to read Romans 12 and all the things that Romans 12 describes about how we function in a system, how we view ourselves, how we respond to people who are inappropriate, how we treat people who are our enemies, I think you'll find that Romans 12 falls in line with this. And Romans 12 describes not only a spiritually mature person, but a mentally healthy person. And so you look at your life and say, hey, when I look at this, does it look like me? And if not, do I have the ability to correct it? And then you understand whether or not you're moving towards spiritual maturity or not. I hope that's been beneficial. I hope it's been something that you can take home and use. Let's pray before we end today. Father, thank you for the opportunity that the Holy Spirit inspired these men to share these concepts. Father, thank you for the fact that your spiritual wisdom is the basis for all psychological wisdom. Father, thank you for the fact that if it's a sound psychological principle, it's biblical. And if it's not biblical, it's not a sound psychological principle. Father, bless these good folks as we've studied together and the things that we've talked about. Help it to be practical and useful. Help it to improve their relationships with each other and our relationship with you. Father, bless this congregation as they try to make an impact in the community. Bless them as they serve you. Give them strength, unity, and growth. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, before we leave today, and we've offered an invitation Friday, Saturday, and this morning, but we never close our services without saying, hey, listen, if there's something we can pray with you about, if you'd like to obey the gospel, if you've looked at yourself as, I'm not letting spiritual principles control me, I'm letting my emotions control me, I'd like some help with that. We could pray for you about that. If you recognize you've not been living in order to please God, we can pray with you about that. If you recognize, of all the things they've talked about, I don't have a good relationship with God because I'm not a New Testament Christian, then we'd be happy to study with you or baptize you. If we can help you with your physical relationships or your spiritual relationships, we have a time of encouragement. We'll pray with you. We'll pray for you. We'll baptize you. All you have to do is let us know by coming down the aisle while we stand and while we sing.